Simon, thank you for talking to me. Can you tell me a bit about the background to Koryo Tours?
Sure. The company was founded in 1993 by two British guys, one of whom is still the president of the company, in charge of it day to day. And the idea behind it was that they were living here. They were friends with a North Korean guy who they used to play football with. And he suggested that they take a trip to North Korea one day just to see what it was like. So they went over there, they found it very interesting. And from there they decided, hardly anyone is bringing tourists here, we'll set up a little company. At the time they were running a bar here in Beijing. Then they set up that company and it became more and more popular over the years, from a tiny number to a slightly larger than tiny number. And yeah, here we are today, 20 plus years later.
You're the general manager. How did you get involved?
In 2002, I'd been living in Beijing for nearly 2 years then. I knew of Nick, the founder of the company, through this amateur football league. And I, like many people in Beijing, was very interested to go to North Korea because it's right on our doorstep. It's so close and so far away and so on. So I got talking with him about it, and he was arranging a trip for some friends of his for the mass games at that time, early in the year, in April. And so I went along on that trip, and while we were on our way there, actually we flew through Shenyang to get there, he decided to offer me a job before I'd actually landed in the country for some reason.
Now, the company's British owned, but it's based in Beijing. How come it's based in Beijing?
I mean, this is the doorstep to North Korea. I mean, it's the shortest international flight from Beijing is to Pyongyang. You don't have to come through Beijing to get to North Korea, but you pretty much have to come through Beijing. Your alternates are Shenyang, Vladivostok, and now Shanghai, which is a bit easier. But realistically, 99% of tourists going to North Korea go through here. Plus, this is a fascinating city to live in and visit, and it's a great place to live, I think.
Why do you think it's important that people visit the DPRK? That's North Korea.
Sure. Well, I don't think it's important for everyone to visit. It's not for everyone. The place selects its own visitors. The costs are high, the restrictions are many. But if you want to go, then you know you want to go, basically. So for those people who are interested in it, in learning as much as possible, and for those people who are able to embrace the ambiguity and the complications and frustrations, then I think it's a perfect destination. If you are not into that kind of holiday, or you'd rather have a relaxing trip, then perhaps go somewhere else. But I think it's important for people to visit because North Korea is in the news all the time for all kinds of big issues, wacky stuff, incredibly sinister stuff, all of which is completely newsworthy. But what is not reported, because it's not very newsworthy, is that some normal things happen there. And the average person of the 25 million North Koreans is mostly just interested in getting by and doing as well as they can. And of course, the purpose of a tour is not to see that, but it is to get a bit of exposure to what it's like to be in North Korea, for people in North Korea. And you can't know anything, you can't know everything rather, from a tourist trip, but you can scratch the surface, you can learn that it's more complicated than it's made out to be, and it deserves further study and understanding.
You mentioned limitations earlier. What kind of limitations are there?
Well, you can't travel independently. I mean, even if you go to North Korea alone, you're fundamentally a group of one. Then each tour group, including a group of one, must have 2 guides, must have a driver, must have an itinerary determined in advance. Now, this is not passed down by the government. This is arranged through a travel company such as my own. We know what you can do, what you can't do, and what narrow grey area there is. You must have those things. You can't wander around freely. Legally, you're not allowed to use local currency, although there are some exceptions to that too. These such limitations. So as a result, you get these strange situations where people say, oh, it's really annoying that you can't wander off and walk around Pyongyang or any other city by your own at night. But also, people are sometimes a little bit miffed that they're not more visibly spied on, for instance. That you want to believe that the government is following you everywhere, when in actual fact, the boring truth is that tour guides are leading you everywhere, and that's how it works. But it's a frustrating, complicating place, and that's...
Who can and can't visit North Korea?
Pretty much anyone can, to be honest. South Korean passport holders, as tourists, simply cannot go. No exceptions. People of Korean ethnicity, who are Korean Americans, Korean Canadians, Korean anythings, can go. That's no problem. Japanese can go, Americans can go, Active service military personnel in foreign militaries cannot. That actually comes from both sides, generally speaking. But pretty much, other than that, pretty much anyone. Now, journalists is the issue. Journalists cannot travel as tourists. For much of the year, for most of the time, journalists simply can't go. But there are times, as we've seen last week, that entire press corps have been invited. So sometimes there are journalists who go, and sometimes we can take travel writers, things like that, very specific to our market.
You talked about the limitations earlier, and we've gone into those. What are some of the myths that people have about North Korea, such as no photographs, no laptops, Americans can't visit? How true are those myths?
Some of them are based on reality in that they used to be true and now they're not. So until I think 4 years ago or so, thereabouts, you couldn't take your mobile phone. You could take it in, but it would be confiscated at the point of entry, airport or train, wrapped up, sealed, stamped, and you couldn't use it anymore. Then that rule changed. Now you can take them in. You can buy a local SIM card. You can buy a local internet-enabled SIM card, in fact, for a lot of money if you're a foreigner. So these are, and Americans not being able to go. Several years ago, they could only go during the mass games, so only for a few weeks per year. Some years not at all. Now they can go like anyone else with a couple more restrictions, such as not being allowed to use the train. However, some of the big myths are things like, a lot of times people expect the North Koreans to have no exposure to outside news. People to ask them, if Mozart is still alive and things like that, not to know that man landed on the moon. I mean, of course, this isn't true. Also, they believe that North Koreans think that they're economically wealthier than everyone else. Nobody has believed that in decades. That's not something that they think. So there's a lot of misconceptions over what amount of information from the outside world North Koreans have. But that's because the bar is so low. We expect them to have zero. In fact, they have a little bit more than zero, and we're impressed at that. I think that's very worldly, and in fact, it should be much higher. But it's mostly things like, believing that North Koreans actually think that Kim Jong-il hit 11 holes in one. Of course, nobody thinks that. That's ludicrous. That all men have to have the same hairstyle. This is provably false with just one man who doesn't have that hairstyle. But yet, sometimes people believe that. People believe there are no shops. People believe that the shops that you do see are fronts, are fraudulent. A lot of people believe that Pyongyang Metro is some kind of Disneyland dug for tourists. But, to be honest, applying Occam's razor to most of this would show it to be false. I mean, the metro was dug in the 1970s and into the 80s when there were almost no tourists. The effort that would go into that, you might as well build a metro. Last week, a few days ago rather, when I was there, my group got on the metro and our guide said, here on the metro, you'll see a lot of people acting, pretending to be real citizens. It was a joke. Still 2 or 3 people came over and said, did she just admit that the people here are actors? You think, no.
How do you address the ethical concerns some people may have about visiting North Korea?
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't think a single person we take, or a single person we've ever taken, has actually been a true, legitimate supporter of the North Korean regime. There are such people, but they are very rare, and I don't think they go with tour groups. We're not a political organisation. Nevertheless, nobody wants their money to go towards the kind of activities that happen in North Korea that we don't support. And, you have to be realistic about it. Some money that you spend goes into the central exchequer. Some of the money paid in tax by the company you buy plane tickets from, hotel, restaurants. These are all profit-motivated companies. They are supposed to, whether they do or not, I don't know, supposed to remit a proportion of their income to the state. And then that goes into the pot, and then that's distributed to schools, hospitals, road building, and the rest, the things we all know about, right? So certainly some of that goes there, but the amount of money coming in from tourists is almost nothing. The tourist industry itself is not a profitable industry. Look at the hotels that are built, the infrastructure and so on, ski resorts and that kind of thing for a handful of thousands of tourists is not what's keeping them in power. So the idea that tourism is propping up the regime in some way is not true. It's economically not true. Also, when people say that by going there you're tacitly supporting the government, this is ludicrous. We're sat here in China. Nobody who visits China is, could be considered to be supporting the Chinese government. Visiting somewhere in no way denotes support for its government. That's simply not true. But yet it's assumed in North Korea. However, North Korean people have almost no exposure to non-North Korean people, to Western people, for example. Western people have almost no exposure to North Koreans. Most people who go on tour have never met a North Korean before. And so even these tiny little ephemeral, incremental encounters you get between people does help to humanize either side, because we may think that they're robots, but they think that we're devils. And that is what is portrayed in their media. Every portrayal of Westerners is almost relentlessly negative. And so to go there and do things which are not negative, help in some tiny way on a human level to make it clear to people that there are points where people can meet, can find commonality, because as we like to say, the North Koreans are not the Taliban. That there are, you can sit down with them and actually have discussions about how you met your girlfriend, how you met your boyfriend, what's your favorite drink, this sort of thing. And they'll probably be very different, but these things are what are overlooked largely. Points of interaction have value, especially when they're added up over time.
What kind of tours do you offer?
A variety, really. I mean, regular tourist trips, city breaks, mountain trips, school trips, sports trips, football, ice hockey, volleyball. I've arranged the first cricket match in North Korea, the first ultimate frisbee match in North Korea. Actually, you have to call it ultimate. Frisbee is a trademarked term. Film trips, trips to the film festival. We've arranged for a lot of foreign films to be shown at the North Korean International Film Festival, which have once again been seen by tens of thousands of people. Yes, mostly Pyongyang middle class, but nevertheless, there's still people there. We've done trips for sports coaches, humanitarian visits. We have a project to provide high nutrition food to 8 orphanages that we do. That we use a lot of the tourism revenue that we gain for that. All kinds of trips. If somebody has a suggestion for a trip, doesn't matter how stupid it is, then we will consider it. We've done darts, pub quizzes. Give us a silly idea and we'll try it.
How many times have you been to North Korea?
147 times.
147 times. And what are your favourite experiences?
I hit a 4 off the first ball I faced in the first cricket match in North Korea.
Cricket in North Korea?
Yeah.
That's pretty impressive.
Well, it was 1 4. I was out 4 balls later.
And a couple more questions. Koryo tours, they offer tours to other countries, don't they?
Yeah, we do trips to Turkmenistan, to northeastern Russia, to Tajikistan, to Mongolia. The meat and potatoes, bread and butter is North Korea. 95% of what we do is North Korea. But some people, and hopefully a lot of people, like the way we do it, enjoy the trip, and if they're interested in doing not something similar, but something done in the way that we do things, the style that we do it, then if they'd like to go to Turkmenistan or Tajikistan, then they can give us a call and we'll set that up.
And if people want to know more about North Korea, your company or your other destinations, how can they find out more information?
They can visit koryogroup.com or email info@koryogroup.com.
Simon, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.